getting a lot of requests from people who want to see how to set up dual joysticks and racing pedals in Star Citizen. A lot of you have been messaging me about having some trouble setting up your racing pedals, and a lot of you I referred to Fusion Thunder's video on the topic, but some of you still seem to be having a few problems, so I'll go through everything, a complete beginner's guide. If you've never had anything besides a keyboard and mouse and using those to fly before, this will take you from the very beginning of the process to the end. So first and foremost, obviously you'll need the controllers. On my right stick, I have a Virpil Mongoose T50 on a Warbird base, mounted on a J-Pane mount, as you can see here. On my left, my trusty and incredibly long-lived Thrustmaster T16000M, also on a J-Pane mount. And on the floor I have under the desk a set of T3PA racing pedals with the 𝓒𝓞𝓝 adapter, which allows you to use the pedals and run it through USB directly into your PC without needing to connect it to a wheel first. So let's start off by getting the software that we'll need, and eventually the final step will be doing all the keybinds. So first thing you'll need is you'll need to download VJoy. You will need a third-party application, specifically Joystick Gremlin, to get this whole setup to work correctly. After you install the VJoy drivers, then go ahead and download Joystick Gremlin, and go ahead and install Joystick Gremlin. After you do that, you'll pull up the Configure VJoy Device menu, which you can do that just by searching in your start menu, and go ahead and add one device. And on this device, really, if all you want to use your pedals for is forward and reverse thrust and space brake, then you should be fine adding a single axis. I just put an X, and you can add in a single button. Presumably, maybe you get a little bit more CPU usage the larger the amount of simulated inputs you get on the virtual device, but so you want to maybe keep it to a minimum, but I think this is fine. Okay, so once we do that, we can go ahead and open up Joystick Gremlin. But before that, obviously you want to make sure that you have all your devices plugged in. One thing to note with the T3PA pedals is that on the 𝓒𝓞𝓝 adapter, there's a slider on that. Make sure that that's set to racing mode and not rudder mode. Otherwise, you'll have some trouble setting this up. So once you do that, everything's plugged in. You've got VJoy configured with one virtual device. You can go ahead and open up Joystick Gremlin. So now we can open this up and we see that we have VJoy device number 1. That's the virtual device we created. This virtual x-axis is what we're going to be mapping our rightmost and leftmost pedals to. And we're going to assign this axis to control forward and reverse thrust on our ship. Okay, so what you need to do here is you go over to T-pedals, and you can ensure that this controller isn't lit up green. If it's lit up green, it means it's activated. So just make sure that it's just black. Okay, so I'm giving a nice press to the rightmost pedal, and we see that it's represented as Z rotation. Now I'm going to give a press to the leftmost pedal, and we could see that it is represented as slider. So now what we want to do, we want to take Z rotation and we want to take slider, and we want to merge them into a single axis. That axis being the x-axis on our virtual device 1. So go over here to tools, go over here to actions, go to merge axis, and the lower half of our pedals we want represented by the leftmost pedal, which we saw was the slider. So we have T pedals, slider is the lower half. For the upper half we have T pedals and Z rotation, and the merged resultant axis will be the X on VJoy device 1. And I would recommend you keep this to average. Okay, and that should be complete. You can go ahead and arm Joystick Gremlin, and from here on you can go into Star Citizen. Alright guys, so we're in SC. I got some free flight loaded up, and I want to take you guys through the entire process of setting up all the key bindings, getting the controllers to work. So for that reason, I saved my control settings right here, and now I'm going to reset everything else to defaults. Okay, so right now we are on default controls, where for some reason I guess the game by default doesn't want my sticks to do anything other than roll. Oh, interesting. And my rightmost pedal is for yawing right and launching countermeasures, and then my leftmost pedal fires and yaws left. Okay, wonderful. So let's fix this nonsense. Alright, so the way we want to fix this is we go into options, we go to key bindings over here. On the bottom right corner, go ahead and scroll over to Joystick and HOTAS. Click on Advanced Controls Customization, and the easiest way to go about doing this is just unbind everything at first. So let's go ahead and do that. And the way you unbind is you just click and then right click. So now that we finished that, let's manage these menus a little bit to make it less painful to navigate. Collapse everything that isn't being looked at currently. Okay, so now let's begin setting up our key bindings, but before we do that, let's go in here, and we could see that none of our inputs do anything, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now let's go ahead and start setting up the key bindings that we want. Let's begin with flight and cockpit. There's nothing here that's really critical right now. Let's just try and get our movement controls out of the way, and then you can fine-tune these as you desire. View isn't really important. Let's go straight to flight movement. So pitch control we want to have on the on our right stick, of course. So double click on pitch and then move it, pull back on the stick, and that'll assign this entire axis to control pitch. And now we also know that the game recognizes our right stick as input number 3. Now let's control yaw, double click on that, and let's move our stick to the left. Okay, and now that entire axis controls yaw. Roll we want on our left stick, so let's double click on that, twist our left stick, and there we go. Space brake. So space brake, I like to have it mapped to the middle pedal on my T3PA set. So the way to get your middle pedal to work with space brake is space brake doesn't work with an axis, it has to be a button. So we need to turn the axis of the middle pedal into a virtual button, and let me show you guys how to do that. So we're back in Joystick Gremlin. Let's go ahead and deactivate the green controller, and now let's go ahead and press on our middle pedal, and we see that the middle pedal is represented by Z-axis in the T pedal section. And you could see I've already set up the virtual button here. What you would do is, if you don't have this there, which you obviously won't if you're setting it up for the first time, you select remap from this drop down menu and then hit add, and then you'll get this menu show up. So what you need to do is it'll start up by showing you action initially, and we want to map this to our virtual device once again, but instead of having it go to an axis on our virtual device, we want it to be mapped to a button. Since I, in the configure VJoy menu, made the virtual device have 4 buttons, I have 4 to choose from. You might just have 1. It doesn't matter, choose any of these. Mine is set to button 2. Condition, you don't really need to change anything, but then go to virtual button, and this is how you're going to configure which parameters for how much the pedal is depressed will activate the button. This seemed to work for me, so I have it activated when the axis is between -1 and 0.95 when entering the range from above. This makes it so that when I depress the pedal, it'll activate the space brake, and when I let go, it'll deactivate it. And that's exactly the kind of behavior that we want. So once you create this, go ahead and click on the green controller and go back into the game. Okay, so now we're back inside Star Citizen, and we should be able to double click on the space brake, depress the middle pedal, and there we go. Now it's recognized as button 2. And now we also know that device 1 is recognized as the virtual device. So let's continue to go down these. We'll worry about modifying speed limiter later. Right now we just want to have our basic degrees of freedom controls set up. So let's continue to move down. Strafe up and down. This is an important one. We want this to be bound to the y-axis on our left stick. So let's double click on that, pull back on the left stick, and there we go. We have it mapped. Strafe left and right. We want that mapped to the x-axis on our left stick. Perfect. And now the only thing that we need to handle is forward and reverse. So let's find that. There we go. Throttle forward and back. So double click on throttle forward and back, and then depress either the left or the right, the leftmost or the rightmost pedal. It doesn't matter because they're bound to a single virtual x-axis. So I'm going to... Oh, and you might have this problem sometimes. So the reason you saw this switching between x-axis and Z rotation on device 2, I think, was because sometimes it's going to recognize the original pedal input rather than the virtual device. One of the ways that you can kind of just play around with how far you depress one of the pedals to get it to pop up as the virtual input. Alternatively, you can use input repeater, which I'll show you how to do that right now. All right, so now that we have that set up, that should cover all of our degrees of freedom. So let's return over here and let's see what happens. So sometimes you may get this problem where it automatically starts going. Just depress the forward and reverse pedal and it should come back to the 0 point. Oh no, it's deciding to behave rather unusually. Let's see if we can fix this. Oh, we forgot to turn off our input repeater. So that's what's happening there. Okay. So now, let's see what happens. I'm moving the stick. Okay, everything is as we desire. Okay. Now sometimes you may have some of the controls might be inverted, and I'll show you how to correct that if that is what happens to you. One problem that I frequently occur when remapping these controls is I'll pull up on my left stick and it'll strafe down. That'll be an easy fix that I'll show you how to do. And the moment of truth, we push on our rightmost pedal and we go forward, push on our leftmost pedal and we go backwards, and if we hit our middle pedal we get space brake. All right, perfect. So now let's address if you encounter some problems with inversions. So as you noticed before, in the key bindings, when you would assign key bindings, it would tell you, Let me show you over here in flight movement. Remember that Star Citizen recognized each controller as a separate device, and our right stick was recognized as input 3 and our left stick was recognized as input 4, whereas our virtual device or our pedals was recognized as input 1. So when we go to controls, if we want to modify some inversion settings, we can scroll over to the pertinent device in the bottom right corner. And let's say, for example, our pedals were inverted. We were pushing on the rightmost pedal and it was making us go backwards. Well, we would go to Joystick/𝓒𝓞𝓝1 and we would identify in the flight movement category, we would find flight, strafe, forward and backwards. And we would change whatever the inversion setting was to get it to go in the correct direction. And the same can be done for the other inputs. So let's say that your strafe controls on your left stick were inverted. You would pull back on the left stick and it would make you go down instead of up. You would go to flight movement in controller number 4 and identify flight strafe up and down and just change whatever the present setting was. Okay, so that'll cover inversion controls. Now, another thing to note is scrolling all the way to the bottom, really take note of the dead zones. For some reason, SC likes to give you certain dead zones by default. Every time I start the game up, I end up having a dead zones of 0.03 in the X and Y axis on my right stick, and no dead zones on my left stick. So every time I go in, I have to get rid of my right stick dead zones, and for my left stick, I like a dead zone of 0.05. And so basically, just watch out. Sometimes, every time you start the game, you have to go in and modify these and set them to what you like. Now let's map the other important controls that we have. Let's go to flight movement and go to speed limiter controls. Okay, speed limiter increase I like to have on the upwards hat position on my left stick. Decrease I like on the down position of the hat on my left stick. Acceleration limiter, don't touch. Speed limiter, this stuff, don't worry about it. Decoupled mode toggle I like to have on the left button of my left stick. And don't worry about speed limiter toggle. G4 safety, please check out my pre-flight checks video to where I will go into these settings in detail, but we don't have to worry about mapping them to anything. Afterburner I like mapped to the trigger of my left stick, so we're going to do that. A landing system, cruise control is not something that you need to use very quickly. You don't need to use precious stick space for cruise control. You can leave that on your keyboard and access that. Same thing with landing system toggle. You're not going to be doing, combat landings in space, most likely. So this you can leave on your keyboard. Toggle VTOL, if you do fly, a Cutlass or or a ship that has that enabled, you might want to bind this to a joystick. I don't though, so I will not. Auto land, quantum drive, you also don't need to bind those to your sticks. So let's close this up. Targeting is extremely important. Look ahead should always be disabled. We don't want to just cycle all targets. We want to specifically be able to cycle between friendlies and enemies. Select target under reticle is very important and will be frequently used. So where I like to bind that one is to the forward position of the hat underneath my thumb on my right stick, which is located right here. And that way I can maintain a normal combat position with my right stick and be able to quickly select the target that I'm looking at. Deselect target, this isn't really important. Cycle friendly targets. I like to have two separate hats on my right stick dedicated to friendly targets and hostile targets. For friendly targets, I will do cycle friendly targets as downwards on this lower hat on my right stick. Pin targets doesn't really work right now. Cycle hostile targets, I'll have that as the down position on my thumb hat. Target nearest hostile, I'll have as the right position on my thumb hat. There we go. And target nearest friendly will be the right position on my on the right stick hat right here. Cycle sub-target, so I like to have a completely separate hat dedicated to sub-target. And I will have the rightmost position on this top hat dedicated to cycling sub-target. Resetting sub-target, I'll have as pushing in this topmost hat. I don't know why there's 3 reset sub-targets. That's kind of weird. And I'll actually, this is the only one where I'll have, I'll do the cycle back. So I'm going to bind that to the leftmost position on the top hat. Just because some ships have a ton of components, a ton of sub-targets, and you may not want to scroll through 20 just to get back to the one you missed. You're never going to be switching between lead and lag pips, so I wouldn't worry about this, at least in the way the game currently is with very low projectile speeds. Scanning radar ping, I don't believe that you can fire and scan at the same time, so I would just bind this to the trigger of your right stick. You might as well. Scanning mode, it's useful to have that accessible in combat. I would, me personally, I bind this to the rightmost position on my left stick hat, because you might want to in combat, especially if you're fighting in teams, scan your opponents, see who's weakest and who's close to death, so you can focus on them. Activate scanning, I don't know if this does anything. And these, I don't think you really need these in combat. So we're done with targeting. Target hailing, we're not going to worry about. And then flight weapons. For myself, I pretty much always run a monogun loadout. My ship will have all of the same gun or the same type of gun. All Gatlings or all cannons or whatnot. So I usually bind the weapon group 1 and weapon group 2 to my right stick trigger together. So we'll do that now. These are irrelevant. Gimbal mode, if you have gimbals, you're just going to leave it on gimbal assist, so I wouldn't worry about these. Acquire missile lock, either don't bind this at all, or if you're going to, I like to bind it to the big red button on my right stick, and launch missile hold to the same big red button. I don't know what this is. Unlock missile, interesting. Oh, unlock missile. That's kind of... might have to bind that at some point, but that's not a critical thing. You can always just not fire. Flight defensive. These are very important. You definitely want to have your countermeasures easily accessible in combat, because 9 times out of 10, if you're doing PvP in the PU, you're gonna get missile spam. That's just the way of life. So launching countermeasures, I like to have very easily accessible on this big old button here on my right stick. Cycle countermeasure ammo on the big old button right above the launch countermeasure buttons. And then shields. So I have tried binding these to the stick in the past. I found that it's difficult to be very precise in how many ticks you're raising one shield over the other when you're binding it to a stick. And to be honest, in combat, you're doing too much, you're pressing too many other buttons on your right stick to be able to deal with managing shields, in my opinion. If you have to do that, I would rather have that mapped to voice attack commands. And right now, I mean, at least between fighters, the fights are over so quickly that You're not really going to be managing your shields. You're going to set them once before you enter the fight and go from there, most likely. But it's up to you to decide whether this is useful. And that's pretty much it for the important things. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon if you enjoy my videos. Also, please consider visiting my Patreon page if you'd like to graciously support my future content and earn some cool rewards as a special thank you. If you're interested in the controllers I use and what my curve settings are, please check the description. There you'll also find affiliate links if you'd like to purchase the controllers and support me at no extra cost. If you're looking for a friendly PvP community where skilled pilots offer training opportunities, join the Lykosar's PvP Academy Discord link below. If you're interested in joining an elite group of freedom fighters dedicated to combating the tyranny of the UEE and its allies, check out my org's website, libertiesreapers.net. See you in the next one, pilots. Lykosar out.